Crazier things happen.
Buenos días, I2RS. Bienvenidos.
Buenas tardes. You're tardy. Buenas tardes. Okay. We have, this is the I2RS meeting. Did we get to scribes?
I was going to actually mention that. So if we go to the tools page for I2RS and go to the minutes link, you'll see a link for Etherpad 95. This is the one that is highlighted on the screen. If we can get a couple of people to go here to help us collaboratively take minutes, it's easier if more than one of you helps. And it's very easy to just add things here and there.
The other things is if you do nothing else, would you please check if you spoke at the mic to make sure your name was being spelled right? That would really help the scribe. So please at least do that much. Thank you. So we have an agenda that's short, but I have a feeling we're going to have a discussion that's long. So the first thing we'll do is we'll walk through this agenda, and if you want to add something, if you have some draft you want to tell me about at the last minute, please do. We'll have the chair slides, which will probably catch us up on the 10 after, and then we'll have a hackathon update. If you participated in the I2RS team at the hackathon, please raise your hand. See, we had a number of people who are working at the hackathon, so we'll give an update on the two parts. We'll go through a quick Q&A on the data models and tell you what's next, and then we'll go through two documents, the requirements for management flow, one last requirement document that we need to send over to along with the rest of the package to NetConf. And then we'll go through the protocol strawman. And you notice we have a good solid hour to talk about it. The presentation will take us much less than that, maybe 20, 25 minutes. And it's meant to have a lot of discussion and Q&A. Okay? With that, we'll go ahead. Any questions or changes? Okay, thank you. Okay, first of all, Jeff and I met as we came into the IETF week to talk about goals, because I2RS is a creation of a protocol interface, and we've been really goal-oriented in 2015, and I had thought we'd be through a bit more of the ISG process by now, but we're resetting our goals. So our version 1 is to send to the ISG all our requirements by May 5th. The one requirements remaining are the ephemeral state, which requires us to do some work on the protocol strawman, and this management data flow. And then hopefully we'll work with the NetConf to at least get an initial protocol idea by July, and then work on a hackathon. And the hackathons have been very useful, so we'll be going through that. And by July, I think we'll have enough experience with our protocol-independent data models to send most of them. The topology data model has been out and been used for a year and a half. Is that about right? about a year and a half. The RIB data model will hope to have some code in open source and in between the IETFs, and the filter-based RIB, we hope to have the same thing in open source. And then we'd like to ask for design team. Russ led off a really interesting discussion after the November IETF on multiple priorities and priority heads. I want to actually try to pick up a design team in this next section. Okay, approved as RFCs. We finally got our first 2 RFCs, yay. And we have 3 requirements at the ISG. The security requirements is maybe going within a day or so, so I included that. We have the 2 requirements I mentioned, and we just need to finalize things. Oh, by the way, if you haven't commented on the protocol security environments requirements, if you would take a moment to do that. What we found in our first review of the architecture is they really wanted us to describe for this new environment the requirements. And Miguel wrote a very nice document. If you would just try to look at it if you're into security. If not, we'll go find some more people from the security environment. The security environment is not a protocol, but the environment the protocol lives in. So if you're running I2RS on a router or on a device, this tells you what security you should be concerned with on that device. I think I've gone through the rest of them. After that, we may give some start to people doing I2RS models for other protocols. And I do want to list the interims. You know, we have a practice of interims to have that deep discussion. We'll have an interim on the 427, 518. You can read it here. The idea is to try to get through the last pieces of the protocol strawman and get to the hackathon with a good, solid implementations. Is Amit here today? I haven't seen him, but if he, Joel, is he here? Did he not come and make it? Okay. He said he was going to try, but it's a long way. Did we find the clicker? Just a minute for a technical change. Do you want to go first or shall I?
Your choice.
Oh, I'm tired of talking. It's your turn.
Right.
Should be fine, I think. No. Did we not turn it on? Ah.
Yes.
Oh, good. All yours.
All right. I'll just tell you one early and then one more
That'd be
quick,
fine.
so that's good. Hi, I'm Eric Voigt. I'm presenting the results of the hackathon that we did on the pub/sub implementation that was in Open Daylight.
Eric, remember to speak in the microphone.
Yeah. So at the hackathon, we had a desire to add more code to the Open Daylight implementation of Yang Push. Yang Push currently in Open Daylight is able to create a subscription from Open Daylight onto a network element, in this case an XR box. Most of the code was written by Ambika Tripathi, who's IMing with me right now, and I got some help from Walid from Nokia and doing some of the netconf notification stuff. Next slide. There was really 2 things that we were trying to present. First thing was that we had a client implementation that could be extended with delete subscription code. If we can create a subscription, it's good if we can delete it. And the second thing we wanted to show was that we had a router that was able to handle change subscription, or say add subscription and delete subscription, and we showed that. Third thing is that we wanted to show that we're using the IETF draft Yang push that's being driven in the NetConf working group, and we did that. And the last thing is that we're going to show that we could use NetConf as a transport and connect directly in via a terminal session and let some of these commands for create and delete subscription also work across NetConf, and we did that. If you look at the setup, you can see a terminal where we have REST APIs going from Yang push in the open daylight down through a subscriber, a Yang push subscriber that goes through the service abstraction layer and down to an XR box in the bottom. You see 3 sets of information in Yang models. We were able to create and delete subscriptions for interface state. In other words, we were allowed to create an interface going up and down. We're able to create and delete an interface, a ACL, so you could do config change and watch the ACLs be changed on the box. And finally, we did routes. We're able to add a route to the box and watch the route information be pushed. So we did add and delete subscriptions for 3 types. And we also were able to do and show it via NetConf directly without having to go through Open Daylight as an intermediary. So both were shown. And let's talk a little bit more about that. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we had a goal of making the delete subscription work. Open Daylight had only periodic subscriptions available. However, in the demo and in the hackathon, we were able to do not just a periodic subscription, we also got working an on-change subscription where we get information sent from the XR box as something is changing in the network element itself. So we're able to do create and delete subscriptions for periodic and on-change for selected data on the device. This code that has been developed is going to go into the next release of Open Daylight in Boron. And if anybody wants to see the demos or see the code, I'm going to be at Bits and Bytes on Thursday in order to get your hands on and watch these things running. That's it. Any other questions or any questions? So effectively, a pub sub implementation based on the Yang push draft in the NetConf working group with periodic and on-change data into a network element.
Hey.
Progress.
So are you hearing? Good. So I was working with we had Eric doing one, and then we planned to work on an environment that Edwin Cordelio, did I pronounce that right? If you're more Spanish enabled than I am. And he sent a tutorial and he sent a VM. And what we discovered is the VM was a little bit heavy for our laptops. And then we hoped to load I2RS data models into the ODL library and connect. Well, after we found that it was a little heavy to get this Edwin's development environment. By the way, I should take a step back. The reason Edwin sent us a development environment is one of the problems we had in Hackathon 80, IETF 94, is it was very difficult for us to set up the development environment. What I found is that between lithium and beryllium, did I pronounce that right? ODL had really improved its setup. So it took me maybe half an hour to download the Ubuntu and download the ODL. Suddenly I had the environment we couldn't set up with lithium. So that's why Edwin had taken his work. He had set up that and MinNet and MinXNet. So, but it kept having too much memory requirements for our laptops. So we took the second goal, which was to hack together an I2RS client and server and get an I2RS route ad working. So these are the people who helped us. Sue, Don, Jason, Lucy, Mamadou, and we broke into teams. And you want to stand up, Mamadou? Mamadou is our first, it was the first time a participant in the IETF, and he joined us bravely at hackathon within his first couple hours, and he actually helped us get the environment up. So we want to say thank you to him, and thank you to the others. Thank you very much for joining us. We're hoping more new participants will wander in and give us some help. We then set up a development environment with Ubuntu 4.3 and Minnet and on a set of laptops, and Don and Mamadou did that and got it up and going once they worked out a few bugs in VirtualBox. And then I and Jason looked at loading Yang CLI Pro, Quagga, and TailF CompD together. And we got the, and Yuma, where's our Yuma? We got the Yuma Pro loaded up the Yang model, and then we were trying to connect the two. Our then next step was to get Quagga to talk to TailF. And after we worked through this a while, we found that this was the commercial variant that TailF actually sells as a Quagga installation. So that was probably pretty good. We did get at least the two ConfD and Yang Pro up. It was fairly easy to use both. You just unload them. Their command lines are easy to work. Thank you, Andy, for and YumaWorks for having a lovely Yang CLI Pro for us. And ConfD was fairly easy to unload and begin to connect. Zebra has a natural RPC. We don't know if we'll complete it by the end of this week, but we hope to complete it and send it out to open source or ODL. So we made a good beginning. This was essentially maybe 4 or 5 hours, which tells you how far we've come in the last couple months. Questions? Dan, anyone else? This is good toy code. Okay. I think that I got through everything here. Anything else from the rest of the team? Good. Okay, I have the next presentation because as the chair tried to bundle up all the requirements that everyone else has done and send them off to the ISG, I found a hole. So I need your help to sort of finish this off and so I can ship them. Okay, or at least one we didn't know about. Now, one of the things we talked about in the architecture is that we would not only have a configuration and an event channel, that we would have some other data flow requirements. Okay, so I took, as the chair, and this is sort of a chair's draft, trying to clean up and put a bow tie around all the requirements. I looked at the use case summary, and Joel carefully pointed to me that that's a sort of old draft, and this is a plea if you could read that and tell me if it's still reasonable. But I looked at this draft and I looked at all the data flow requirements. And after having done everything else, I sort of compiled a list of requirements it would have set. Now, I am not saying these are requirements we need to do, but it is something we need to talk about in case we want to include them in the requirements. There are a couple, taking my chair hat off, that I would like to see us consider, like what happens if we're doing a management channel in the middle of a denial of service attack. Do we want to try to do something special? I would like to try to, in my personal hat, see what we can do about validation. Do we always do netconf style validation, or do we do maybe less to make faster, or maybe none at all? And there are implementations which are doing all three. So let me start with this, and at the end of each one I'm going to go, does anybody think we really have to have this in, will make the same call on the list, but this is a fairly short turn. Okay, the first one is exactly on this types of checks. And it's one that, having talked to 3 different implementation people, or actually more like 5 or 6, there are several ways to do it. The one is minimal data reception checks. Are the TLVs valid on the wire? And you assume the client has done something useful. Now, what can happen? You can shoot yourself in the foot by having bad data. And as Andy will tell me, if you get bad data in the data store, life is just really bad. It stays bad likely. But there are some implementations which do enough checking and they want enough speed on routes that they would like this. The next one is non-referential cheats. Don't do leaf ref, don't do must, don't do instance identifier. And this medium ground was sort of suggested as a way to speed things up. And the next one is full checks. Now, does anybody have an opinion and like to discuss it at the mic? Is there anybody who's done enough implementation to say something about this requirement?
Hi, Andy Bierman. This is a very server-centric approach. What does this give the client developer who's trying to write code that works on multiple boxes? It gives them no confidence that the Yang is actually implemented. So it really diminishes the value of Yang as describing the constraints. Also, we should note that these machine-readable constraints are optional. You could put all your constraints in the description clause. So you're going to say, well, I'm ignoring the description clause too. I don't need to enforce that. So my concern here is that it provides really low value to the client developer to not know that the Yang contract is going to be honored. Based on arbitrary things like leaf ref statement, because I could put the requirement for leaf ref in a description clause instead. So this is really a simplistic view of how things, and it also goes to, well, I trust the client, and no client is ever going to try to attack me and exploit information, or set up a path to send leak privacy data. So in the IETF, it's going to raise security guys' interest if you tell them you're going to do this, I would think.
I am well aware it will be raising the security guys' interests. So I have had people who are doing implementations do all 3. I'm glad Andy's here to represent the full validation, but this is one, in your chair's hat off personal opinion, we really have people doing it 3 ways, and I don't want to break it, but the path of least resistance is the full checks, and we can do that and say it's too busy. Anyone else want to make a comment on this? Okay, your chairs, thank you. There are chairs over here, and we can have people move in if you want to sit. If you want to stand like me, that's a good idea. The second one, there was a requirement right now. NetConf, and please correct me if I'm wrong, can do both XML and JSON as far as a form. Oh, but ResConf can do XML and JSON. Thank you very much. I'll correct the slides. I don't know that anybody really needs anything more than this at this time. But that was one of the requirements, is to be able to do data formats beyond that. And ASCII, excuse me.
Joel Halpern. So what I saw was there was a use case which suggested that some people wanted that in the early stages of our work.
That is
I
correct.
don't think that, given where we've gotten, this requirement is
I
justifiable.
agree with you 100%.
Maybe. So, Jeff, so For large data transfers, we have to have a minimum to implement. So our XML in RESTconf or NetConf is a minimum to implement since it covers the current common IETF tool chain. At some later point in time, we may want to have specific applications that aren't that, but we have to start with one.
Okay, so unless someone really, that was everybody agreeing on XML or XML and JSON for RESTconf? Okay, that's closed. This chair is about closing issues. The next one is go ahead, Kent.
Kent Watson. So the large data transfer, is that for on the control side of things or on the telemetry data acquisition side of things?
Right now, there's only one thread coming out. You'll see. The answer right now at this point in the question would be yes and yes.
Yes.
Right now, under NetConf, I can't imagine doing anything except XML. And
Okay, well, I'm just going to mention that on the telemetry data acquisition side of things, probably netconf push or restconf push would be used, and then even other encodings are being envisioned, like Google protobufs or Cap and Proto.
if you have a proposal for the protobufs or the Trift, I've tried to get those proposals. I would love them.
Dan Bogdanovich, you just mentioned there's only one thread coming out.
Right now, we have not, I'm a little bit above, right now, the only thing that is currently where I have a definition is a netconf or a restconf. That is not a single thread out of it, it's just two mechanisms.
I believe Sue means transport rather than
Transport.
Okay.
session.
Wasn't I saying, if I said thread, I'm sorry, Dan. Transport.
Eric?
Transport thread.
Yeah, Eric Voigt, this is more of a question that I asked at NetMod, and that is, how would we integrate with protobuf and other things that are not necessarily IETF standard specs? So we have a lot of desire to it, but I don't know exactly how to do that binding. Is there any thought people have on that?
So it's just a matter of, how you serialize your data. So if you're using the Google protobufs, you will get also the RPCs. And in this case, so sorry to correct myself. So, with the protobufs, you can just serialize the data, and then you can, map them into, for example, if it's telemetric data, you can map them into your RPC that you have in Yang. So, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yes, you can make protobufs work. That's not a question. The question is, what are we going to standardize? And for now, what we have agreed to standardize is XML and JSON, and let's not go into what are all the other things and how would we make them work, because that's not the question on the table for us. Please.
So I do have to support Joel. We have to start with the mandatory to implements just because we need to make progress. That said, even outside of I2RS, there is going to be demand for this type of telemetry. The right places for that, standardization work for translating Yang models into other formats and other transports is work that probably belongs in NetMod.
And you will have a comment, a question about IPFix next. So let's.
Well, no, I would still, say that we should just have like you can essentially negotiate the transport, that you should be also, negotiate a data format between, the client and the agent.
So for somewhat strange reasons, Eric actually put in transport type as one of the selectors inside of HubSub.
Yeah.
So Dan, just so I make sure, you want to select different transports or?
Choose the transport.
I'm saying, different data formats.
Different data
Yeah,
formats?
that you can negotiate on data formats. You can
Negotiate
offer,
the data
so
format.
you can offer, these are the data formats that I support, and then, you can then
Okay.
reply which one you want to accept.
Understood.
Yeah, I second both points there. It is certainly possible to do protobuf, and I did talk to some people from the BBF yesterday, and they are looking at IPFix to support what you're saying.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that'll be useful. Still on number two?
Yeah, actually, I did a draft a while back and had a proposal for negotiating the encoding. There's a natural point in the NetConf in between the hello and the first RPC where they have to change the framing anyways. And right there, you can negotiate anything you want as far as if I say I want XML or I'll take JSON and this guy says, oh, I'll only do JSON, then the way it matches, you go, oh, JSON's the match. So you could just add protobufs and whatever. And I think I said this on the mailing list too, but I would like to see like Yang push kind of define this and I2RS just use it. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not our job to specifically design the protocol components. We're just providing requirements and hoping they end up generally useful.
So for this first version of I2RS, should we include something as a choice that can be negotiated beyond XML and JSON? And that was protobuf, just XML and
So-
JSON?
I think what we have to worry about to start with, it's going to be our job to have a mandatory to implement because that's what we're going to need
That's
to
what we're
have.
doing.
But we should have the flexibility, and this is what we're seeing in pub sub, to allow for selectors for other formats at later dates.
So for the first version, I am, just going ahead with XML and JSON is fine with version 1 just to get it standardized and adding, like future flexibility in the follow-up versions. That's, from my perspective, this works.
So it's not so much the future versions. The selector is going to be in there from day one. It just, the only thing that will be an option in the selector from day one is the mandatory to implements.
Okay. I think we took care of 2 and 3 all at once. So I've got it.
Oops, sorry.
No, that's fine. Well, there must be a 4. Okay, this is where we get to the IP fix. Should we in the first version, and I will call it in the first version, allow IP fix as one of them? Does anybody want IP fix in the first version? Joel, you know my personal opinion on this is no, and your opinion is no. If you want to just sit down, we've had this debate in case, I know your answer is no. Is anybody's answer yes for IP fix for the first one? Eric, do the people who are using IP fix need it in the first version of I2RS? Because it's going to go to,
I don't want to speak for the web. That would have to come from them.
okay, so until I get more input from them, no, but know that it could come. So I guess I got to frame it that way. I'm good to hear that they're trying it. That was in the specification. And that's the 2 of 4 and 5 is can you send it and can you choose it? Okay. Should we be able to support data traffic that scales up and scales down? In some sense, the push applications has the ability to scale subscriptions up and down, but should we be able to put in the protocol something that says, oh yes, if you're doing memory processing time or up-on flow, we have this rate. Now this could even be a Yang model for the I2RS, but that's one of the things. Anybody feel like it should be in the first version?
You need resource monitoring, Dan Bogdanovich, you need resource monitoring because otherwise you might send down you will receive from multiple clients conflicting requests and you will try to execute them and you will run into a race issue.
Okay, so that's a yes from an implementer, which usually is my gold standard. Okay, so we'll do yes. Anybody object to yes? I mean, this is just closing off ideas. So your chair is, okay, this is the one. Do you think we should be able to interact with OEM functions in the first version easily?
So I'm going to ask for a clarification. This is Jeff. Do you mean should we have as core data models that actually interact with OEM?
Yes. Should we have core data models and should we be able to pass the necessary information?
So for resource monitoring, you need OEM interactions because, but the data models for OEMs are not finished. But we have to take into the account because if you want to do resource monitoring, you need the OEM information.
Okay.
And I think again, to ask another clarifying question, do we mean actually an I2RS OEM module, or is this a request to actually have routing OAM in the Rome or Lime sense.
Do you want to say something before I answer that, or do you want to wait
Let
for the
me
answer?
try phrasing the question a little differently. And Jeff, if this doesn't address your question, you can bring yours back up. There's two very different notions for interact with OAM. One is being able to observe the results of connectivity checks and pings and other things that are started by whatever. That's an interaction with OAM, and one that makes perfect sense to me. The other is having mechanisms in I2RS to trigger all of the myriad OAM things that go on. And that makes me really nervous for V1.
Right.
And so you use the word interact, and as I discussed with you on the call, one meaning I have no problem with, the other meaning makes me really uncomfortable.
And that's why I left it this vague, because we need to have, thank you, Joel, for standing up and being my friendly straight man.
So I would maybe restate this then, that we would allow I2RS to be used for the OAM mechanisms.
Used to see information coming back for the resource management and for other things, but not in the first version. There was MPLS use cases which acts to trigger some of the OEM functions, and that's a little advanced for my first one. Once we get some example code, we might be doing fine. Hey, I hope this recording is really working, because I will listen to it carefully as well. Okay. So I think Dan answered this in, but let me give the example. I think I'm going to go ahead to 8. Nope, 9 is the one I had it on, I guess. Okay, 8. Okay. So one of the things that I came about when I was doing 2 pieces of work, one for I2RS and one for I2NSF, which is a security management interface, is I suddenly realized that this could be running in the midst of an outage, right? We oftentimes do want to manage our boxes for short term during some sort of attack. During a denial of service attack, you may have a blast. Should you be able to change your protocol or change how your protocol interacts during these times? Should that be part of I2RS's first round? It's important for the son of I2RS, or the associated type idea in I2NSF with security devices. If you have a denial of service, if you have a TCP attack, if you have something, is it important to have the I2RS based protocol be able to be changed? Oh yes, I'm getting attacked. Make sure to send stuff on 2 different streams, see if I get it back, and assume we can do reassembly. Anyone want to worry about that in the first version? Bob? It's good to see you here, Lou.
Bob Moskowitz, HTT Consulting, Consulting to Huawei. This comes out of work that Sue and I are doing in a couple of different venues, and looking at being able to construct a context where the messaging is decoupled from the transport, so that you can change transports as well as needed, or characteristics of transports as well as needed, and that attacks on transport does not attack your ability to do your messaging. So this is a really some actually work that Sue and I have been working on for over a year, and now coming to so I think some solid basis on it. So you'll be seeing presentations along this in I2NSF, in DOTS, in MILE, where these attacks are being dealt with. But I would think it also applies here very strongly to the I2RS environment as well. So that if we can leverage this as much as possible, as I plan on stealing much of I2RS for some other areas as well, we offer some of the work we're doing in terms of transport decoupling to the work here.
The question is whether we really want to put this in version 1. And I hesitate being the author, I hesitate.
Version 1, we're just getting the ideas out here, and
Yes.
you want to get your version 1 done.
Yes.
So, I said,
But-
this is a work in progress, so keep aware of it, and be prepared to make a jack to the left if the network starts being nasty to you.
Have you seen this in your work, anyone in the implementation that where you have attacks that you need to worry about this?
Dan Bogdanich, I'm not saying, I was mostly looking at adjusting to the network outages based on the link failures and the OEM information.
Okay,
So-
not next to the protocol.
No.
Okay. We'll be doing some hackathon work and some experimentation on this. We will report back, so I will go on, but this is another piece. Okay, so for the people who want to be able to choose the transport, should we be able to, do you specify it now in Yang, in the push? The transport.
We have choice in transport.
Okay, you have choice in transport.
We have Netcom, RESTCOM, HTTP.
Okay, that may be what I'm asking for here, so maybe done. Okay. Then I think we're done with that one, which is that, and I think we are back down to this discussion, which is,
That one-
please do.
Microphone, please.
You asked about choice of transport. NetConf is in the working group draft that's adopted, but the RESTConf and HB2 is an individual draft which has not yet been adopted. So if you want to have that adopted, come by NetConf tomorrow.
And Thursday. Any comments on that, Insu? Any from the NetConf chairs, any comments or any wisdom you can give us, or? See, you walked in at the right time. You can't hide. Oh. Okay.
People if they care to have RESTConf or HB transports with us.
So to throw a comment from prior discussions, we had discussed that RESTConf is probably a better fit for a lot of the things that we're tending to do, just simply because it has the atomicity that we're expecting out of a lot of our applications, and less ambiguity as to what the data stores actually mean. Although it sounded like the data store question itself might be getting some level of refinement, that NetConf may be less of an issue. So I think we're still open to either of them. RESTConf was initially a good fit. We'll see what that actually offers us.
But you asked to ask a question, go ahead and ask the room and we'll record it. And I just want to make sure I don't fumble over it.
Asking room, who wants transport of RESTConf? Who wants transport of HTTP or HB2 for these types of actions?
If anyone's interested, okay. Andy's got it, maybe one or two. Many people are scratching their heads. We'll come to NetConf and they'll explain more. Okay. Now, this work started out with a really good idea from Kent and Andy when we were describing a whole bunch of complex things and they gave us a very simple solution. After that, they have been hard at work making NetConf and RESTConf and all the NetMod working right, which has made our life easier. So I will try to go through this. They both agreed to be here and throw bricks if I get it wrong. In the past, there's been candidate running and startup and operational data, but lately, thanks to Ken, I believe it is your draft, yes? Yep. There's a NetMod ops state which has a different viewpoint where you have candidate running startup configuration, intended configuration, and applied configuration and derived state. Our protocol, did I do something wrong? Please do.
Just a small correction in the slide. So the applied config is actually defined by the config true nodes as well. The orange line should probably be
One more
between
down.
applied config and drive state. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Please, everyone, assume in the future slides that the line is down, and I'll post a corrected slide after the meeting. Looks like I still have it. But what we have in the ephemeral state, ephemeral does not affect candidate or running or startup. It is simply something that directly makes a change to the intended configuration. Stop there and say that again. It does not change any of the candidate, running, or startup configuration. So if you thought back to our hackathon example, and you know anything about routing daemons, the routing daemon for Quagga, the approach we took just simply sent routes into the route table, never entered in any configurations. That's why we thought it was a good example. Then the example becomes applied config, and derived and normal state are the things that you might have if you had a BGP peer, or if you installed a route, you might have the phrase installed. So that's a thing that would come back from your installed state. Okay. Now, Andy thought of a very simple thermostat, where some of us who've been sitting in these rooms would like to have a thermostat IP controlled, where you have a temperature and then you have operational state. And that derived desired temperature might go to, in a general configuration, the intended config, and go all the way through to applied config and derived state. Now, if you had an I2RS scheduler for some reason who wanted to temporarily either schedule a change, it's hot and we're all coming to the meeting, and so I would like this room a little cooler. And then you might have something that would hold it in case we had a badly performing heating system and it got too cold to hold. These would be two I2RS clients that might change the state in the ephemeral candidate, which, well, it's ephemeral. That will run into. There's ephemeral intended config, and then it would go into the applied and the derived. Okay, and that's the basic way it fits inside of the ephemeral store. Now, this is where we would have some Yang changes. The proposed one long ago was just to say ephemeral true, and I think we've had fairly good agreement on ephemeral true. If we were going to do any change on validation, opposite of what Andy proposed, you would have to do something that says this particular thing would have either no checks or minimal checks, no reference, or full checks. That's where it would come. Now, how would it look? If you had RESTConf, you would have RESTConf data thermostat desired temperature, a value of 18 centigrade. You might have RESTConf with the context of ephemeral. Okay, how might it look in netconf? Same thing, only you would have, in this case, the full check for an edit config. Okay, that is the basic, simple process inside of our I2RS. It's a very simple ephemeral change. We found when we were looking at the coding that it was a fairly easy change for routing, probably also for firewalls.
Mahesh Chetanandani. So just a quick clarification on what is ephemeral validation.
I'm glad you asked, because it gives me a chance to restate this. And the idea that I had with some implementers, and I, in a design team, asked 3 different types of implementers. And one said, gee, I do all my checking in upper level ODL work that I'm doing for my client, and I don't want anything. I want an availability to have an RPC that just dumps in the traffic, and if I've made a mistake, it's my problem that data store messes up. I2RS said that is your chance. If you mess up your data store, as Andy says, it might be really unuseful for the rest of your clients, but you have a specialized relationship with that one. Second one might be you might not want to do referential checks, no musts, no leaf refs. That's an option. The third one, and the default one, is the normal netconf full validation. Full validation. Right now, we haven't had anyone stand up and say, just reporting one chair to another, I must have the no validation. However, the people who suggested it aren't here, so it'll go to the list. One, and yeah, I said, if this is all educational, I am really thrilled that you all are kindly listening. And Andy, you can restate from
Okay,
Mahesh.
no, and maybe, there can be considerations that the ISG will agree to, but the premise here is that the client is trusted and
That
the
is
client is
absolutely
sending good data. So I don't need to duplicate the work over on the server side, which is definitely not how the protocol is written, which is untrusting and fearful of hackers.
That is correct.
So,
And before I let this come to this point, I had a little chat with my AD who said,
We have a remote question.
oh, please, let me finish this and I'll pick up the remote, who said this routing interface has in the architecture, if you shoot yourself in the foot, you shoot yourself in the foot. But please, remote question.
Go ahead, Chris. So we don't see you speaking, Chris, at this point. Oh, you're in the queue now. I think we need to click on it. Push the red button.
Push the red button. Is it working yet? No.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Awesome. So I'm coming to this pretty new, although I've been working on with this op-state stuff for a while. So I've got a question. When so I see that we have like the intended config and the ephemeral intended. So I think obviously like the ephemeral would be overriding the intended. Is that right?
That is correct.
So I think that we're gonna, and I haven't read the draft, and you may have already solved this, but it might be a problem we have to solve still. A lot of the use cases we're thinking of with this is we have a lot of or at least one of the use cases is where we have maybe daemons or managers that are out in the config system that are checking basically, subscribed or whatever, and checking intended and applied, and then noting any differences. So for example, if something doesn't go to applied after a certain amount of time, raise an alarm. So I guess, is there some kind of indication in the applied whether that applied config has been overruled or overridden by the ephemeral, so that things that are checking know that the applied that it's looking at shouldn't match the intended config?
So let me answer the question in two pieces. In the normal netconf, and again, netconf folks, Andy and the rest, correct me, there's both the asynchronous and the synchronous write. And I'm assuming in your question, you are not asking about the difference between the asynchronous and the synchronous write. The asynchronous may have changed the sent stuff to the applied config, but it's not actually been applied yet. Where the synchronous, my understanding is the acknowledgement coming back actually says that it's already been applied. I'm assuming that's not the question, and what you're asking is what happens if the I2RS overwrites the intended config. And if it overwrites the intended config is changed, and it doesn't, and whenever it does that asynchronous write or synchronous write, those changes that were in the intended config actually go down in one suit. So the place that the online code has to actually detect that the ephemeral has overwritten the configuration data is in the intended config. In the implementation we tried to do in the routing daemon, Chris, we were just going to put for the route to the routing daemon, we were going to treat I2RS as a different protocol, and like OSPF or ISS would have been a protocol, and that way is the way we would detect inside essentially the values that would be written from the RIP. Now, that might be a little hacky, but it was one way. to
Yeah,
show
that
you
one's
the
a little
difference.
complex. Can I jump back to the easy example you gave earlier was like a thermostat. So let's say I've netconf configured, through the normal method. I've set a temperature that's in intended config, and then I have a client come in and change that temperature into an ephemeral, raise it 5 degrees or whatever. Now, I have this manager out there running around, and when it queries, it's just basically looking at, it's going to look at the path to the intended config for the temperature, and then it's going to look at the path to the applied, and it's going to say, are these matching? Are you saying that when the ephemeral client changes the thing, when I look at the normal intended config path, it will change to the ephemeral value?
That's correct.
Oh, okay, and that works then. All right,
Okay.
cool, thanks.
I actually, the next step for you all is that I'm going to show you a route example of this idea. But let me start with the little temperature control and make sure everyone is okay. Okay, netconf people, I was going to go through the netconf changes. How many people would like me to walk through the changes, or how many people would like me to walk? I was going to go walk through the route case given the audience, which is not as many netconf people as routing people. And then I'll come back through all the changes that are listed in the protocol strawman. Okay, then I'll take that approach.
So whomever is listening into another session, you might want to drop the volume a little bit. Thank you.
It's
Oh,
the
it's
other
actual
room.
other room? Wow.
Can someone wander over and tell the other room to?
I don't think so.
Oh, well.
I thought somebody was listening on their phone.
No, we turned off this one so that we didn't
Last
affect them.
one. Okay, my bad.
Okay. This is a very simple routing case. 128.2 with nexthop 1 added by netconf config. Woohoo. 128.2/16 added with nexthop 2 by ephemeral. Writes over it. That's our little client writing over it. And that's happening for the very example of a DOS client. You want to send this traffic a different way. Maybe you want to send it to the sync.
Sue, would we more precise to say overlay than overwrite, since the 128.16.1 will come back if the ephemeral one goes away?
Yes, it would probably be right to say overlay. We've used overwrite in the past, but I will go through that in this example. It is overlay. When the box reboots, it'll come back to the original. Okay, so here's our little I2RS agent. It's writing to the ephemeral intended. The running writes to the intended config, ephemeral writes over it. Let's see how that looks. Oh, by the way, this is the route table in case you missed it. It has operational data and route data, but we're only going to focus on route data. Simply, first time, the running config writes 128. It should have been 2 there. Nexthop 1 to the intended config. And the scheduler client, which is the client Chris was talking about, is reading from the intended config and reading from the apply config. Thank you, Chris, for making it real. This was an example we've used for a while, but I'm thrilled to hear it might actually be there in the real world. Then when you put it in the implied config, your ID would have nexthop, the route installed, as most people see in their routing table. Okay. The scheduler still might continue to monitor in the I2RS client, might continue to do normal netconf reading and read in the running store, but it will also read in the intended config with the replacement. Okay, so the scheduler might be checking what's happening, and the IPS might replace the routing as an ephemeral. which is coded in yellow. That gets put in the applied config, and you get an installed case where you have netconf 2, and off the traffic goes to a sink. What does it look like? I've got one error in here. Just a minute. It's now context, right, Andy?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Things change in RESTConf, and I thought I caught everything. If you had RESTConf, you do a put with the running rib, with the route, with the next hop. If you did an edit config with the next hop 2, you would just put the context ephemeral. Okay. And you might see the reading of the actual ephemeral data store where you, this is where I'm not sure, Eddie, if we just read the applied config, we wouldn't have to specify the ephemeral to find it. It wouldn't be there, right, anymore?
I think so.
Okay. Okay, that's changed. Just a minute. Okay. So that's the simple change for the config, and then it gets installed like everything else. Okay. I think we found everything. That's the simple example, and I'm looking for my netcut example. I think we'll stop with that one and go back here and ask, is there any I'll ask, is there any other questions about the simple next hop case? As Chris and Jeff might say, you'll see is overwritten. If this reboots, it's gone. If another ephemeral client overwrites it, it's gone. Say the scheduler client overrode it with a next hop ID 3, it's gone. There's no saving. It's like a write that might happen from a routing daemon to a central routing table. Once you write over, it's gone. Now, if this seems really simple, thank Kent and Andy for thinking up of a single solution. Questions on this basic? Okay, so our basic tools for our I2RS protocol are our traceability, our log, and this very simple use of ephemeral state. So protocol 1 should go out through netconf, hopefully with fairly minimal changes, we hope. That would be good, right? I see a smile at last. I see 2 people smiling in the netconf chairs.
So
Oh.
time check, you had 1420 is where you wanted to start data models.
Pardon?
You had 1420 where you wanted to start the full set.
1420. Are there any questions about the protocol stuff? Is important to get feedback. The data models are all progressing. I'll go from there. Any questions about the protocol in general, since most of you are thinking about the functional aspects? The next, we're about to go into the deep dive on the netconf. Please.
Joe Clark, it may not be what you would consider basic, but it goes to my comment I made on the straw man. The whole pane of glass thinking, to me at least, breaks, literally shatters, if you do the next write to intended config. Because I think what you're saying is if I then write to intended config with like netconf to the actual, what you call normal data store, that pane of glass shatters on top of it, and I win by default because I'm the last
If you
write.
write the next configuration.
Okay.
No, are you coming from running or are you coming from the I2RS client?
I'm coming from running.
You're right. It shatters, it goes away because it
Okay.
wins.
I think
That is the
the default.
That is the default.
I
And
get
you are
that.
correct. It shatters the pane of glass because config changes, and that is in the architecture document, as Joe will let you know.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to surprise you.
Am I channeling Joel?
Hello, Joel Halpern. I think that what people get confused is your phrasing, which says it does this by default, but you can do that. We say you can configure it to preserve, to pay attention to it. We do have what is the setting if you haven't set it up any particular way, and the setting is then that normal changes to config take precedence when they get applied. But that's simply a behavior among the allowed range because different operators have different requirements.
So as an operator, you could say config never writes over ephemeral. Okay? If it changes, you don't.
Okay. It wasn't clear from your straw man, and that's why I made the comment. If that
That's a
included
good comment.
the normal or the running config, and if it is the default, is it mandatory to implement something that's not that?
It's not.
Is it, you're saying it's the default, but as an operator, can I assume then that my vendor who is implementing the agent side of I2RS would allow me to do something where the pane of glass takes precedence no matter what
One would
changes?
hope you have an intelligent vendor, and that would be the assumption. Should I write something like that in there?
That's what I'm thinking, yes.
Okay. Will you drop me a note and just can you use it back?
Kind
to-
of tried that comment on the list, but everyone's out here now, but I'm happy to continue
No,
the
I
conversation.
didn't glean what you just said from the
Okay,
list.
okay.
So that's why I'm asking, at least drop a mail list so I fix it.
So we have a question on Jabber from Rahul Agarwal. What is the
Rahul.
role of the scheduler client?
The scheduler client is just any I2RS client. I just named it to go back to the example that Chris Hops kindly brought up before I had the drawing. It's just an example. It could be any two clients. Okay, all of you came to learn a little bit about I2RS. Are there any questions on the basics? Because then if we deep dive into the netcomp and restcomp details, I want to make sure that you don't get lost. Anybody have any concerns about this? Does this seem reasonable? How many people think this is a reasonable first pass? Okay. How many people don't think it is a bad first pass? Okay, it'd be good to hear why this is a bad first pass. Oh, I'm sorry. How many people think this is a good first pass? Okay. How many would not want to approve this as a first pass? Okay, so we're pretty good. Anybody have any questions about the basic version 1?
There is a question in queue.
Please in the queue.
Hi again.
Thank you for being the question.
Yeah, so the scheduler client, from what I heard from you earlier, I have an overlay of the ephemeral on this slide here in the top yellow box, the route 128.2.16 ID, next top ID 2. So that's overlaying. The running data store, I think that this diagram is wrong. You can tell me if I'm wrong in my viewing of it, but the black arrow that you have going to running data store, I don't think is possible now, right? Because when you're pointing at that, the intended config with the overlay, that is the running data store. So the way that this, I think, should be drawn is that black line goes down into the applied config. So you know what I'm saying? Like, if you overlaid the intended config, that's what the running data store is. So to speak, I mean, the running data store is a logical item.
Putting the black line from the scheduler down to the applied config would match your description.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And since that's a real case, the reason I had it drawn this way was to remind me that an I2RS client could use regular configuration gets to go through the netconf channel to grab a configuration as well. There's nothing that
Oh,
says,
no, so that's why I'm asking this question, because what I heard you say earlier was that I wouldn't see that ID1 anymore. When I go and I look at the config and I
You
just do a
can't-
get
you
to
cannot-
look at the
cannot
config.
see it, I'm sorry. You
ahead.
cannot see it in the intended config. You could see it in the running config.
Those are the same thing.
No, they are not.
Okay, yeah.
According to my
I'm
experts.
getting really confused now because the running data store is separate from the I2RS ephemeral state. Running data store is always lower priority than I2RS. Otherwise, what's the point of doing this?
Wait, okay.
Right?
Let's-
And I think so in the running data store, if I do an edit config on running, that's the route, that's the configured route.
Yes,
If I do a get config on the running data store, I get back that configured route.
that's all I was trying to say.
Okay.
That was all
If
I
I do
was.
an I2RS write on the ephemeral data, that's now the system is going to try to apply that, and basically the running data store gets ignored unless the I2RS data goes away.
Okay,
Right?
yes, that's all correct. Let me
Okay.
give you
So-
the question before you go away that Chris is asking. If you had a client, could it read the running client, not via I2RS, but could it read the running data store at that point? Not the intended, but the running.
May I
Well,
make-
netconf does that with get config.
So-
Yeah, those are the same. So Sue, those are the same thing, basically. The intended config is what I have configured in my running data store. So the question here is whether you can see both the ephemeral and the intended, and I think you're saying you can't.
You can. This is Jeff. So I think we're having our usual hang up in I2RS that certain of these words have very distinct meanings in netconf. So running in the context of netconf is from the configuration data store, which we would call static config out of I2RS. The intended config, if I'm remembering my verbiage correctly, is the merged view of the running config from static merged with the I2RS ephemeral configuration. Do I have that right, Andy?
Yeah, so the server is the parts of running config that are not being
Shadow.
overridden still apply. And so it's a composite of that becomes the applied config. And derived
Right.
state, you ask which particular data store am I getting it from ephemeral, then you might get next hop 2. If I get it from running static, then you get next hop 1.
Right. And to sort of answer the second half of your question, Chris, is that as part of the protocol requirements draft, the get and get config type operations will probably require some level of extension to say which view you're looking for. So you can specify, for example, get from running, which will get you the static configuration. There'll be a different way to ask for the applied configuration that's the merged view. And similarly, there may be a way to specifically do a get that gives you only the ephemeral state. So
Yes. Okay. So that's different from the earlier. That was different from the. That's more complex than the earlier answer, right? I wish we weren't even talking about running data store, right? I like the concept of calling it static config, right? Because if we don't have to have data stores here to make my point. My point is that through normal channels, I've set my configuration, my static configuration. Then I have I2RS come in and put an ephemeral overlay on that.
That is correct.
When I say, what do I have configured on this box? I'm asking for the intended config, and what I'm hearing is that I'm going to see the overlay, and that's fine.
And then what you
But I'm
request.
just pointing out that you don't see the white box then. It's been overlaid.
Okay, yes, you only see the overlay.
Cool. So it still
Yeah.
makes sense to me. And I like the new arrow.
Yeah, hi, this is Kent. So I was just thinking these slides maybe are confusing because the running data store, you have a line going down to intended config, but really the intended configuration is the composite of the running data store or the persisted configuration plus the ephemeral.
Yes.
And so
Yes, I
it's
see
really
that it's
the entire
confusing.
box that has both of them together is the intended configuration, not just the one.
Yes, I see. I will change both. Thank you both for the input. Okay, what time do we close today?
We end at 1400.
1400. So we have a bit longer.
1600, sorry.
Good. So are there any other confusions on the basic, or shall we jump into the netconf and RESTconf changes? Please, if you're confused, obviously the experts have been confused. Your discussion will only help us. Okay, we will go into, please go ahead, Jason.
Just more of a comment. Probably would help if we alter these slides to be very, very explicit with some more examples of maybe a couple of steps, like here's your initial config, here's what you read from intended, here's what you
Yes.
read from applied, here's what you read from derived state. Then show the next step. Okay, now the scheduler has put a ephemeral new
Yes.
temperature. Here's what you read from here. Here's what you read from there. I think we just need more details in here to make sure we're all talking the same thing.
I think we do that, and maybe perhaps a YouTube video that walks through it with some comments would be useful. I'm into lots of communication. Okay. Anything else that anyone would like to ask before we do netconf? Okay. Okay, the NetConf and RESTconf folks have been very good, and they have a form that you essentially walk through to fill in new capabilities. Is that a good way to describe it? Did I use the right? You usually have a very nice form when I find it to describe what you want to change to NetConf and RESTconf. So hopefully I've filled in the form right. So again, what is an ephemeral data store in a more precise way? It is not intended to survive a reboot. It is never relocked. Excuse me, never locked or relocked or changed. One pane of glass versus the config one pane of glass, we've just gone through that discussion. Joe, do you think we got it? We'll hopefully clarify it a bit more. But you can, does the concept that we've discussed make sense?
It makes sense. I don't think I like just having the pane of glass versus not having the pane of glass. The exception there comes.
We should do it at the mic.
Yeah, microphone, please.
Joe Clark again. It makes sense. I don't necessarily like it. I think that it should play more with the whole priority, the config, the persistent config, or the non-ephemeral config should play more with the ephemeral config in terms of priority, because to me, it makes sense until you say, oh, well, it's the last write. So you have to take into account that temporal aspect of it too. You're not just looking at ephemeral. So you have to take into account that ephemeral pane shatters the next time you write to it. But like was pointed out, it is in the architecture, it is the default, and you can change it. So
Well, the good point is, once we've sort of closed this first one, my suggestion is that you and Russ work on a design team to go through the other one. I just will close one off, and if
Okay.
you think of a better time, by the time it gets standard, you can always overwrite the current stuff. So that's my strong suit. That was my agreement with my co-chair and AD is to, but please, you and Russ, I hope we'll work on that over the next couple months. Okay. Multiple clients can write to the one pane of glass, but the highest priority wins. You can signal a capability for node via hello. And we went through the error checking. The dependencies are the ephemeral flag. It doesn't look like we have too many people looking for the validation flag, but I'll have to check that, Mahesh and Sue. And Yang models must support notifications of write conflicts. New operations, you'll need a link config, link ephemeral to a target config. At least that's my understanding for link and bulk write. But I think that bulk write was for the routes, and everything in our data centers, data models uses an RPC. So I don't think we need to do bulk write in the first one. It just might come. I just didn't see any. You aren't doing any bulk writes, are you? You're just using regular writes for the topology? Okay. Get config, edit config. I think I've gone through all the support, non-support. You can read it there. And I believe the same is true for RESTconf. I don't think there's much different. And you need to use the ephemeral context, and your head must in RESTconf. Go ahead.
Mahesh, Chetan, and Dani. So if you could, for people like me who probably were not involved in all the discussions for the ephemeral validation, is go back to why it was needed separately from, say, the validation that.
Again, we're having the discussion on what you need for this on the read and write. The three choices were: you trust the client, you don't do must referential checks, and you do the full checking. And this is just something that would allow you and Yang to specify whether you want to have that per model. On some models, you may never want to allow someone to do a fast write. Maybe for the route, you might want to allow the bulk write, but maybe for the OSPF interface, never going to allow that. So you would always have full validation.
And that was needed especially for ephemeral and not for, normal netconf doesn't have those options for validation.
Andy's comment is one would be unwise. Let me say unwise instead of the other comment to use that in netconf.
Yeah, your previous slide had this validation specified in the Yang, but that's not really correct. You want it so that the server is like saying, I'm only doing 1, 2, or 3, and not the client picking it. See, if the client picks it, client 1 says something and says, oh, set this route over here with no validation. Client 2 comes along and says, set my route over here with validation. Well, Yang validation doesn't work on one edit at a time. It works on the whole database. So now client 2, his edit is going to fail because client 1's edit isn't valid.
In other words, you either get all your database one way or you get it all another way.
Well, Yang doesn't have any concept of just validating an edit. It's the whole entire data store. I had a big argument with someone at Cisco many years ago about why we do checking. He says, I'm writing routing code and I can't be bothered to check parameters because it has to be fast. And I said, well, if the box seg faults, how fast are you running now? So the reason we check stuff is to keep the box from crashing.
Yes. So Mahesh, you have caught another piece where we thought it was working on a database. Obviously, okay. The rest of this for the head get pushed is just to get the ephemeral. And I think nothing else is really exciting for the netconf people. It's pretty much as you'd expect. I'll take questions, and if not, we'll call it a day for today, unless someone has more questions. Okay, we have left an I2RS time slot after the netconf in case we get embroiled in some large discussion. We don't have any topic for it. It's just left in case you guys need a room after we have our joint discussions. I don't anticipate, we will send a note out during the netconf meeting if we need it. Thank you for your time.
We are adjourned.
get any notes?
We got lots of things.
Pardon?
We got lots of things.